Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on development by design. My name is Nielsen, and I'm an associate professor in information systems at the Department of Informatics at the University of Oslo in Norway. I have been working in the area of ICT for development with an information systems focus since 2012. Topics important to me in ICT4D is digital innovation, software platforms, and the relevance and sustainability of ICTs in developing country settings. As an engaged scholar, I am working towards informed and thus better decisions and action taking in public health in developing countries. I have spent time working with this as a part of the HISP project and with the DHIS2 software in countries including Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, India, and Sierra Leone. From my experience, I have come to observe and learn that designing IT that is relevant and usable and implementing these solutions in a sustainable way and with impact in the developing country setting is challenging. It's often difficult to achieve socioeconomic development, which is often or always the aim of IT projects. Based on this motivation, my paper for this conference and in my presentation today, I will introduce and discuss the concept of development by design. It is broadly accepted that it is challenging to achieve success in IT projects in developing countries. There are many stories and examples of how IT project fails. At the same time, of course, there are also success stories. The developing country context have particular challenges. These challenges can, for example, be described in terms of digital divides. In this paper, I have taken these divides as my starting point to identify what I call values related to socioeconomic development. In other words, these divides must be our concern, and we must address them to achieve these values. To help achieve these values, the guiding research question in this paper is, how can we embed socioeconomic development in IT? I attempt to answer this by exploring the concept of development by design, and with this concept, I also develop a set of IT design principles. My motivation for this work is the idea that if we can change the mindset of IT developers and the mindset of those commissioning or investing in IT solutions by making them focused on socioeconomic development when designing or investing in IT projects, we can promote socioeconomic development better. I hope the concept of development by design can help in this direction. What I'm trying to do is to start to explore whether and how we can embed socioeconomic development in IT. In this, I recognize that the design shapes IT, and IT reflects human values and has a potential impact on socioeconomic development. IT can, for example, be inherently political as a result of being inflexible. Other ITs are political by design. In the same way, IT is neither development nor non-developmental, nor is it neutral. For example, researchers have shown how code and algorithms serve particular interests and may discriminate and reproduce and amplify inequalities and work against particular marginalized groups. The purpose of this paper and this presentation is modest and primarily to initiate a debate about whether and how we can embed socioeconomic development in IT. My approach to this is to suggest and explore the concept of development by design. This concept is by no means fully explored, well developed, and my definition is perhaps immature. And perhaps it's not such a good idea after all. But this is a starting point and an attempt to see if this is of relevance or can be made of relevance. Therefore, of course, I also invite you to give feedback and engage in a discussion with me on this. One important inspiration of this work is the concept of privacy by design and the role it has come to play. Compared to development by design, privacy by design addresses the challenges of privacy for people using IT and the risk involved when personal information, and in particular sensitive information, is exposed due to the design of IT. Privacy by design ensures that privacy and data protection are embedded through the entire project lifecycle of an IT solution, from the early stages until the final product. This is partly about making privacy built into IT and not just as an add-on, and partially building a mindset of privacy for IT developers and commissioners. In my concept, development by design, I take an outset in socioeconomic development, reflected in existing ICT4D research as the core value. There are many different values related to socioeconomic development, but my choice was to work with the values reflected in notions of digital divides. I consider these values as more or less accepted. This focus includes values of access to IT, relevance of IT, social inclusion through IT, and participation in digital innovation. Based on my experience, I think it's fair to say that socioeconomic development is not always at the core when we are designing IT for the developing country settings. Also, based on my experience and ICT4D literature, I, through my literature review, identified a set of central development values related to digital divides. This set is not exhaustive and by no means covering socioeconomic development as such. My aim is also not to put specific values over others, but digital divides seem to be a good starting point for my attempt to develop design principles. I also consider them as well understood and accepted. I use these divides to explicate a handful of central values. I further created a framework of more practice-oriented IT design principles inspired by the foundational principles from privacy by design. So now to the results. What is the underlying value when we engage in ICT for development projects? Well, there are many values, such as freedoms, emancipation, living the life we value for users, etc. I have chosen to focus on a certain set of values as reflected in the extensive debates on digital divides. Based on the divides, I have defined 4 central values. Divides between developed and developing countries have received substantial attention from researchers concerned with the link between IT and socioeconomic development. Over the years, we can see in the literature that different generations of divides has emerged and advanced in the reality, as well as reflected in research. I will now go through each of these 4 divides in short. The first divide, the first generation of divide, was the access divides. Initially, there was an overarching lack of access to computers and networks in developing countries. So the underlying value here is access to IT. The second generation of divides was the design actuality gaps. While access has improved in general, the design of IT still primarily occur in developing countries and not mainly for users in developing countries and their purposes. There is a common concern that the context of developing countries poses particular challenges to IT and requires different technologies and implementation and governance approaches. For example, resource constraints in terms of weak IT infrastructure and electricity outages will inevitably result in expensive and fluctuating internet connections. These technical obstacles, for instance, mandate solutions using as little bandwidth as possible and providing offline capabilities to the users. The underlying value reflected in this design actuality gaps is relevance in the local context. The third generation of divides I label social digital divides. Where IT is affordable, the users have access, and suited for the context, we may still lack the knowledge and opportunities to use IT purposefully, which is social digital divides. The underlying value here is social inclusion. And related to the potential IT has to support social inclusion in terms of providing information, skills, and economic and democratic participation. The underlying here then is social value. Social inclusion is the underlying value. The fourth and last divide, we also observe the lack of participation in digital innovation by organizations and people in developing countries due to the lack of ownerships, rights, and capacity to innovate. Organizations and individuals in developing countries are primarily the users of IT and does not, at least yet, take so much part in innovation which current architectures such as platforms are opening up for and enabling. The underlying value related to digital innovation divides is participation in digital innovation. Moving on to the concept and the design principles built on these values. So my definition of development by design is geared towards promoting these values and bridging the divides. So my definition of development by design is an IT design approach, putting socioeconomic development first and at the core. This definition shows an approach which has many different levels. First of all, it is related to the mindset of developers of IT, as well as the procurers, buyers, users, and, for example, donors. It does relate to the issue that we need to promote these values first and at the core. The values is important here because it's pointing out what we want to achieve. The design principles are based on the values reflected in discussions in ICT4D research and the principles for embedding values in IT from privacy by design. I thus suggest 8 principles. 4 of them are foundational, reflecting how to embed the values, and the other 4 are reflecting the values presented on the previous slide, reflected in development-oriented principles. I will go quickly through the principles now. The foundational principles 1 to 4 are inspired by privacy by design and how to make central values relevant and incorporated when designing IT. First, it's crucial to embed development values in IT before implementation and use. Development should be at the starting point and not introduced at a later stage. The second principle, IT features promoting development should come as default. There should be no needs for inventor intervention by users or implementers to assure development. Third, development should be a central part of the IT solution. Development should not just be an add-on. Fourth, it is important also that it is possible to combine digital innovation and promote socioeconomic development at the same time. So these are the 4 foundational principles. In addition to these foundational principles, I also suggest 4 development-oriented principles. The first is access to IT. A foundational barrier to access is IT costs. Costs can relate to end-user devices, connectivity, and software. With server-client architectures, data storage and processing in a centralized and shared manner, and can thus be more cost-efficient. It is possible to use online solutions with offline capabilities and bandwidth parsimonious edge computing to balance between different variables in this setting. The second principle is relevance in the local context. By using modularization and platform architectures, we can achieve this. Making software that is configurable and customizable is also relevant. The third principle regards social inclusion. IT solutions should be engaging, promoting participation and contributions from the users, and offering a real opportunity to participate in society. The solutions must be valued by the users in their context and provide sustainable advantages. Social inclusion must also include all, and in particular focus on marginalized groups. The fourth regards participation in innovation. This can be enabled with open software licensing, open interfaces, platform architectures, and available boundary resources such as documentation, training, and access to innovation networks. So, this paper has aimed to trigger a debate on if and how we can embed development values in IT. I have done this by developing and presenting a concept of development by design and a framework with 8 development design principles. As a first attempt to define development by design and concretize related design principles, this work has obvious limitations. I briefly point at 2 of them here. First, the foundational design-oriented principles must be put up for scrutiny by other ICT 4D researchers and practitioners. Second, I have at this stage not ventured into discussing how to make these principles operational and for whom. My presentation today and my paper is also primarily a theoretical exercise, and these principles must be put to work to show their relevance. That was my 15 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that this will spur some debates. If you would like to know more, I recommend that you read my paper. Thank you for your